Before I begin this talk today on reconstructing generational language barriers, let's start with one story about myself. Before coming to Exeter and before living in America, I lived in Hong Kong and Taiwan for 15 years. And it was there where I was exposed to many different languages. Within my household, my mother and father spoke both English and Mandarin to me. And I went to an international school where I spoke in English, I learned in English, and I also had German as a foreign language. These three languages for me were the three that I was most accustomed with. But I was aware that when I walked outside to the community around me, that these were not the languages spoken. I lived in Hong Kong, and I realized that everywhere around me, although there were Chinese characters, people spoke Cantonese, the main dialect in the region. When I went back to Taiwan, I was aware that although many people spoke Mandarin, there were sections of the population that only spoke Hokkien, including my paternal grandparents, which is unfortunate because I never got to talk to them. And so all these questions about languages made me wonder, how did these languages come to be? Why are they considered dialects? And why are they different? I thought about this. Was it because of the writing system? A quick look at the Latin alphabet shows that this is not the case. Why are they different? Was there a parent language? And so finding these parent languages are very useful in history. Why? Firstly, when we find parent languages and we find how they change, it tells us a lot about the social change within the culture as well. But secondly, languages are used as a medium to spread stories. If we are able to find these parent languages, if they are extinct, we will lose these stories until someone is able to recover these stories. And so today, the focus on the talk is to be able to discover these parent languages. We'll be asking 3 questions today, and I'll be trying my best to answer all 3 of them. The first one, why do languages change over time? And there may be many reasons. I'm going to give you 3 of what I think will be most relevant for today's talk. The first idea is the natural process of passing down languages. Consider everyone in this room. We're going to line everyone up from one side of this room to another side of this room. The first person on this line is going to think of a message or a rumor or anything he wants. He's going to pass it down to the second person. Then the second person is going to whisper it to the third person, and so on and so on and so on until we reach the last person. Although 2 people and the message they perceive within a line may be similar, it is almost always the case that the longer the line, the more changes there are. The first person and the message he says may be different to the last person and the message he perceives. And this is the case in society as well. Let's take each person as a generation. A parent, a mother, a father is going to pass this lesson of the language to a child, and the child is going to pick up on the different pronunciations. It's going to take up on the slang. It's going to take up the accent. And this will pass on to the next generations to come. Inevitably, this will result in sound shifts. The second idea is contact with foreign populations. And there are 2 examples of this. Case A, if we consider a language that is now extinct, there were 2 groups of people that once spoke this language, but are now isolated. Because of the first reason, that everyone, when they listen to a language, they hear it and they learn it from their parents, these languages may eventually diverge. They will continue to diverge until a point where maybe these languages become mutually unintelligible. The second example of this is consider 2 civilizations. They can be strong, they can be weak. The point is that there is benefit when they talk to each other, but they speak different languages. It turns out in this case that many of them will start to incorporate different ideas from different languages. They'll start to use borrowed words. Why? For example, let's take the Eastern Front. If a country like China in the past had a lot of military technology or academic knowledge, then other languages are more inclined to take this. Similarly, right now, if there's a job opportunity in this current society, it also makes sense to learn a different language in order to enhance your possibility of getting a job. In these cases, there are always some type of incentive, and all these languages are constantly taking ideas from another. If a word is able to express an idea, that would be difficult to be expressed in another language. This other language will consider putting it into their own. The third idea is regional identity. Regional identity may play a role in how language change. Let's take North Korea, for example. North Korea speaks Korean, but they also are aware that many of the words they've used are also borrowed from Chinese vocabulary. So they're reversing this. They're trying to use words from Koreanic roots or inventing them. We also see a similar case, not in spoken language, but in written language, with Kazakhstan. Kazakhstan is now attempting to switch from the Cyrillic alphabet to the Latin alphabet by 2025 as an attempt to distance itself from Russian regime and its history. There are many hypotheses to where languages may come from or what the parent languages may sound like. One example is the idea of Indo-European languages, that languages from English to Sanskrit are all related, and that there may be something before that was all one language. Now, of course, these may be quite controversial, but there are certain ideas, for example, Proto-Indo-European. And what they do is they try to take very essential words from each language, water, human, or numbers, and see if there are any connections between these languages. The second question here is who starts to change? Is this you who's starting to change? Is it I? Who is starting to change? And to look at this further, let's take a trip. We're going to Orchid Island, which is in the south of Taiwan. This is a small population, and we can split this to the northeastern front and the southwestern front. There are 2 villages in each place. Let's talk about the language a bit. They don't speak Mandarin as their first language. Rather, they speak a language called Yami, and this is one that is from their island. We have 2 words here. One is house and one is day. House can be pronounced as Vahai and day as Arao. But this is one way of pronouncing it. We call this a raising sound, where we have AY and AW being risen. There's also another way to pronounce it, Vahe and Aro. And so a group of linguists wanted to find out why there was this change, or is there any change going on? Here are some statistics. They started off by counting 400 people and their pronunciations. It turns out that people in the northern area pronounce it with a risen sound, Vahai and Arao, at 80 to 85% of the time, whereas in the southwest, it turns out it's only around 7 to 8%. We see a similar dichotomy when we split men and women in this society. Around 60 to 65% of men pronounce it with a risen sound, where only around 30 to 35% of females do this. Here's another visual representation of it. We see that, as expected, people in the north pronounce it with a risen sound, and this can also be the case for the owl sound. But here's where things get interesting. Instead of comparing region by gender, let's compare age. We see that there is a much different story being told. In the past, men pronounce it with a risen sound, I, ow, much more than women. But for when we look at women below the age of 55, we see there's a shift. Women are more likely to pronounce it with a risen sound. Similarly, we see an even stronger correlation with ow. We see that women are pronouncing it with a risen sound much more than men. So what can we conclude from these statistics? Well, there are 2 things we can conclude. The first thing we can conclude is some sounds shift faster than the other. The rise from ow within women is faster than the rise of I, the sound. But also, this is something that we in social linguistics we call changes from above and changes from below. Changes from below refers to unconscious change within pronunciation due to factors such as rebellion or upward mobility of certain people. Changes from above, in contrast, is an aware change. It's a conscious change to revert these ideas, to reassert some sort of dominance. So what does this tell us about the island's history? We see a change from below within the women. The women are pronouncing it in a way that's more similar to the men of the earlier generation, and this has also resonated with how the population and how the history of Taiwan goes. There was more schools, there were more education that allowed them to be able to live out of the social norms that were in the past. So this is what we see from change from below. Similarly, there is a change from above from the men in the society. So Orchard Island is a good example of how and who starts change. The third idea is, can we reconstruct past sounds? Maybe it's easy to read an alphabet right now and say, I know how to pronounce these. But we have a big enemy here. We have logograms. For example, we have hieroglyphics. I'm pretty sure nobody in this room can pronounce it. I could, but it probably wouldn't be right. And the reason for this is the symbols that are on this are different to what I think they are. For a reader or for a learner, this may be obvious. But for somebody who's here 3,000 years after, this does not seem very easy. Similarly, we see a case with Chinese. And so Chinese linguists were also interested in this. They were wondering, how are we going to be able to talk about our sounds? How are we able to document this? So they turned to rhyme dictionaries. And what they did was they split these books and volumes into the 4 tones, and they split them into rhyme groups, the sounds in which all sounds ended with. Within each volume, there was something called 反切, which basically means that you would take the red word and you would split it into 2 other characters. You would take the initial consonant from the first one, and then you would take the ending sound from the second word. There were also rhyme tables, where the rows show all the 4 tones, and then on the columns we see all the different possible initial consonants. So the problem with this is this were all based on what Chinese sounded like in the past. We still have no way of finding out what they sounded like. Were tones the same, or did tones change? Here is something that's important. Bernhard Karlgren is a Swedish linguist, and he realized that the only way to reconstruct sounds is by looking at other languages in which the parent language evolved into. Dialects, xenogenic borrow words, loan words from Japanese, from Korean, from Vietnamese. What he did was he took words from all these places and he tried to find out what they sounded like in the past. For example, here we have Cantonese and Mandarin on the side. The words obviously sound different. In fact, Cantonese has more than 4 tones. That's not the case for Mandarin. So there must have been a change. So the whole point of Karlgren's work was he looked at these patterns and he wanted to find a way to unite all these words into one language. Of course, this is under the assumption that they all came from one language. So the whole idea of this is that they're trying to discover patterns. And with the advent of computers, this is much easier. Computers have much more data. We're able to use it more efficiently. And computers are also good at finding patterns within large sets of data. But in order to use this, we also need some sort of human intuition. We need to know what we're looking for. And for that, there are lots of competitions or lots of exercises out there that allow us to understand what's going on in their minds. For example, the North American Computational Linguistics Olympiad goes through a lot of similar questions in which you have Rosetta Stone problems, languages that you know and a corresponding language, and you need to find out why they are similar, which sentences match. In conclusion, our history is dependent on language. Languages in which our stories are being heard. And for that reason, if we want a better knowledge of the past, if we want to learn from our mistakes from the past, it is essential that we learn the stories from the past, and this can only be done when we reconstruct the linguistic barriers that we once had. Thank you.